creating cosmos out of chaos. Shunyamurti, thank you so much for taking the time today to sit with us. You know, it is a great honor for us to be able to have a conversation with you today, because to us, you have actually played a huge role through our personal practice, especially during these very interesting, destructive times that we're in. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
It's a great joy to be with you both, and I appreciate your sincerity and the trajectory of your own spiritual growth and your courage in striking out at a new level. And so I wanted to support that, because we need to disseminate truth at this time, because there's so much disinformation in the world. And if we can get spiritual truth out, not just political truth and the kind of awakening at a partial level that most people are experiencing, which just creates fear, but to have the total awakening that brings bliss, then that's a great blessing for everyone.
It truly is.
Thank you. I think for us, this new stage, this podcast vehicle, Stars and Destruct, it's something we felt it really a deep need spiritually to deliver. It became almost like an obsession in a way, that we knew that taking the work that we've done on our mats internally and bringing it to challenge and question the external world in a public forum, it's been something we feel almost as if we've been called to do. Whenever we've dabbled in that area, we get a lot of, you guys are yogis, teach asana, stay in your lane. And it's challenging, but also, you know, it's water on a duck's back at the same time. But, you know, I think a really interesting starting point for us, because we've witnessed you bringing the external circumstances of this era into a spiritual practice. And
bringing the spiritual wisdom into the external world as well, and how to cope with it. And that's such an interesting interconnection that we don't see a lot of spiritual teachers doing in this modern day. So
what do you think the role and the importance is of both of those sides?
Extremely important. And by the way, to comment on your first statement that you're a yogi, you should stay on the mat. Perhaps hatha yogis, but even the real hatha yogis don't just do that. Iyengar and others, Krishnamacharya, have always expressed the philosophy of yoga, which goes back thousands of years, and encompasses the understanding of the flow of time and of the kind of situations that the world would eventually end up in, including this one, which is Kali Yuga and the end of Kali Yuga and what that would bring, and have always understood that the world is Maya. It's an illusion, a simulation in modern terms, and that the real is transcendent, but that the function of yoga is to unite the real with Maya, to bring that power of Brahman or Shiva into this plane in order to be able to revive life at the end when the souls are all exhausted and corrupted and impure, and to be able to create the energy that will bring about a new world, a new Satyuga, a new kingdom of heaven. And this is the moment in which that has to happen. It's the last margin of opportunity in which there is still enough freedom and still enough clarity in the minds of people who have been dumbed down and have been turned into herd psychotic mentalities, and to be able to awaken us souls who are children of God to the opportunity that this is, the blessing that this really is hidden in the darkness, and the duty, the responsibility we have to the Dharma to bring the truth of non-duality into this chaotic multiplicity.
And you speak of Kali Yuga, and I think for everybody watching this and listening to this right now, a lot of people may not even know what is Kali Yuga. Can you explain?
Yes.
What is this time?
Okay. In the classical yogic understanding, but also in the Western classical Greek understanding. In fact, throughout the whole world, in the what's called the axial age, thousands of years ago, it was understood that time is circular, and time is divided into different yugas. Four main yugas, which are like eras or epochs. And these historical periods have an entropic relationship to one another. So we begin with what they usually refer to as the full moon, the 16 full degrees, in which everyone is an avatar. Every inhabitant of the world is in God consciousness, with all the siddhis, all the powers and the capacities that brings. And then gradually there is a fall. And there we go from a golden age to a silver age, but the silver age is still a one in which everyone has soul consciousness, if not God consciousness. But then there is a fall from that, and we enter a copper age, and there's a destruction. The world in the golden age is one continent, Pangaea they call it. And then at this point of destruction, it splits into the 7 continents that we have now. And 7 is not an accident either, as perhaps we can talk about, because that's a very important magical number in yoga. But in the Copper Age, there are fewer beings who are able to sustain that vibrational frequency of true divine presence. And so there's a gradual fall, but there are still higher civilizations. We have only the relics of a few of them now, like the pyramids of Egypt and those kinds of temples and megaliths and Stonehenge, those things. But we don't know really what they symbolized and how the people lived. And then we entered Kali Yuga. And this is called the Dark Age, the Iron Age. It's the age in which we are now in ego consciousness for the first time, no longer even in soul consciousness. The ego is a derivative of the soul. And the ego for the first time is consciousness identified with the material body. Before that, consciousness was always at a soul level and transcendent and connected to angels and to higher beings and to have the power to shift into different levels and frequencies of consciousness. But once we entered Kali Yuga, we lost that power, and the ego, because of its identification with the mortal body, came the fear of death. And the fear of pain and of aging and all of that, and the loss of the sense of being at home in the world, right? And then as Kali Yuga continued over thousands of years, and it started with a number of prophets who came in those early days to give us the awakening. That's when yoga began, and that's when Buddha came shortly after that, and the Mahavira and various others. And you also had the awakening of the Greeks and the Persians, Zoroaster, Zarathustra, and the Taoists in China. So you had still an awakening, but then that gradually became lost, and the cultures began to become more aggressive, more warlike, and more selfish, greedy, envious, and more fearful. And less intelligent and less coherent, until we now have reached this point at the end of Kali Yuga where we have such a dumbed down population that people cannot even recognize what is going on. There's a mass die-off, there's genocide happening, there are incredible things, but most people are in denial of them because they can't handle the truth. You see, that's the main thing of the ego. It prefers ignorance to knowledge. And so we're at a time when very few people are willing to know everything that we need to know in order to change the situation for the better. So we're at the end of that period where almost all, even egos, let alone souls, are exhausted. And they have no more creativity, which is why you see there's a death of culture. There's very little little music, drama, any of the arts, they have all fallen. Even the cinema, the last art, is now mostly very trashy material. And there's a loss of all moral values, all of the traditional ways that society was able to sustain itself with divine masculine and feminine energies that are all lost now in transgenderism and all of that. And so people are so confused, and they have no more values, and they feel so cynical. And so depressed and so nihilistic that they are actually captured by what we call the lower death drive, which is a drive in the ego that wants to die. When it can't handle life and sustain its happiness, which it no longer can, even with drugs or whatever else they want, they want to get out. And so there's a massive epidemic of suicide in the world today. I don't know if you're aware of that.
It's rising.
Yes, and violence and every other kind of perversion and of antisocial behavior. And the world is now run by psychopaths. And they are creating ever more monstrous tyrannies, dictatorships, and bringing about global destruction, which we can see before our eyes.
Yes.
So that's what the end of Kali Yuga is. But the blessing is this. At the end, because it is so terrible, people are beginning to awaken, which they wouldn't otherwise. They would just go into their, virtual realities and become happy slaves, of the system. But they're not even able to do that. So there is a massive awakening, and you are part of that, and you are awakening others, which is wonderful. And it's very good karma, and it will help your own vibrational frequency because you receive grace. That divine intelligence that is responsible for all of this is also more and more visible, more perceptible by those who turn to God or Brahman or the Buddha mind, however you want to refer to that ultimate reality. It's more accessible now. And so people are able to rise in a very short time to the state of Jivan Mukti, or liberation in life, and be able to return the world to that vibrational frequency. So this is the moment in which everything is polarized. The darkest of the dark, but also the brightest light is now available to those who want it. And so it's a beautiful, auspicious moment. So they call the end of Kali Yuga a fifth yuga. It's a secret yuga that is referred to by the Kumbh Melas, the great gatherings of the yogis. This is the Kumbh Mela at the end of time, when all of those who had been yogis or avatars in past lives and lost that return to that awakening and their own illumination again, and return to God consciousness. And so this is often called the confluence age, or Sangam Yuga, the bringing together of all the rivers, the holy rivers of life that were the founders of religions and of yogic lineages, and all of the souls who have fallen, who now have a yearning to rise again. They are lifted up by divine grace. So this is a moment when we are going to see wonders of a very miraculous and beautiful kind, along with the worst horrors. And it's a paradox.
Well, you mentioned something about grace being behind this darkness. So you're saying that God consciousness is creating this destruction.
Indirectly, let's put it this way, the egos are creating it. It's a fallen state, but God gives every being free will, and we have misused our free will and chosen to fall into lower forms of enjoyment and cut ourselves off from God and from the Dharma, the values that would sustain society. So in our free will, we have violated the laws of God. So in that sense, God is innocent of it because he gives us that free will, and we've misused our freedom. But because we still have freedom to return to God and to let go of the ego, but we have to be willing to go through ego death in order to do that, God's grace is there and is lifting us up. And it brings with that wisdom. What we will all gain from this is the realization that we must stay in God consciousness in order to sustain the world. So the next cycle of time, we will have that wisdom gained that will enable us to prolong that heavenly period before there would be another fall. And there's a learning. The world is a wisdom school, and we are all gaining wisdom, and some will graduate from the school and be done with this level of reality and go on to a more cosmic level of reality.
Do you think that everybody has the ability to graduate? Like, what does it take out of on an individual level for one to graduate into that God consciousness?
Well, the problem is you have to want to.
That's
very few people want to,
yeah.
or even think it's possible, or even imagine it. Most people are atheists altogether, and they don't think there is anything beyond the ego. And the current ideology is materialism, Darwinism, consumerism, and even the most intellectual people today are usually believers in psychoanalysis, which says the limit of consciousness is the ego, and anything beyond that is a fantasy. It's an illusion. So they cause people to feel it's ridiculous, it's a fantasy, and if we're mature, we'll stay in the ego and the drudgery of that level and accept that as that's all that's possible. And people don't even try. But if you have enough intellectual curiosity for the truth, then you will discover in the practice of meditation that there is a level of consciousness beyond the ego, and it's filled with light and filled with insight that you won't get any other way but through meditating, and the ability to transcend and feel the blissful presence of God. And it's that, once you have the taste of God consciousness, that brings you to be able to break free of all the ideologies and belief systems of Kali Yuga.
Well, something really interesting that connected to me through your teachings was that idea that the ego has captured our soul, which now has severed our connection to spirit. So you're saying that once we're able to return back to our soul, free the soul, then we're able to restore that connection with God and God consciousness. How does one do that, though? Like just meditation, or?
Well, the soul is asleep. So the soul is not aware of itself. This is part of the problem. This is why the awakening is so important. And as people see how bad things are, and they recognize the deceptive nature of not only the egos running the world and in the media, but their own ego is lying to them, and it's creating false desires and beliefs and an inability to love and to relate properly. And so people begin to do an inner quest of how can I get free of my own addictions and my own fears and anxieties and depression, and they begin a process that usually is psychotherapeutic, not spiritual, but they will often get to that point, because even many therapists now are turning to spirituality because they see the hopelessness of psychology in its current state, and people are beginning to say there must be something more. And when you do that, then the soul will be triggered to awaken, and it will extract itself from the ego and go through a rite of passage, which we call ego death. That it's really not death, because the ego is not alive. It's just an operating system. It'll be deleted from your software in your brain, and then you'll download the operating system of divine presence and the intelligence, the Satchit Ananda of God consciousness. The infinite intelligence of God will come, and then you, by surrendering to that, then life becomes spontaneous in accord with the Tao or the Dharma of the will of God. That's the logos in Christianity, and all of the religions speak to the same issues. There's only one religion in the world, and one spiritual path with many names. But now that is awakening in everyone.
That's really beautiful. I think, on a practical level, for somebody who has a desire, recognizes that their ego is, many people have this self-awareness, I think, to see that they're being controlled by habits and loops of their behavior, but they also have a deep desire to fix and to be whole again and to rise up above that which is holding them down. Is there like what is a great practical piece of advice that we could give to somebody in that situation who's asking for first steps of help?
Yeah. Okay. First is to understand the structure of consciousness at the ego level, and then at the soul level, and then at the supreme level. At the ego level, the consciousness is split between a conscious and a subconscious. And in between there is a sensor. There's an agency that determines what your conscious mind can know, what it can remember, and what it can make use of, and what it will forget, what it will not be able to take in, and what it will repress. Right, Freud discovered this back, 150 years ago now. But it was something that all of psychology is based on, the recognition, really, that we have a subconscious mind. That's where the habits are, and they're based on fantasies and childish constructs, because the ego is created when you're still an infant, and so we are run by an infantile program, and that's when you're an adult and you see you're still acting like a child, you say something is wrong here, right? Now, in the traditional cultures, there was a rite of passage at puberty, and people would then go through an ordeal and a vision quest, and they would get a new name, and they would realize their true identity, and the childish ego would be gone. But we don't have such a rite of passage anymore.
Right.
So people remain children throughout their lives, and when the world is run by infantile beings.
I say that all the time. Like, I look at the people running the world, and they're just like big kids.
Yeah.
Like, there's no sense of like moral code or responsibility or just like, or duty. It's just like they're run by the impulses of the ego, of whatever it is that is the driver inside of them.
Yes.
It's fascinating, but also terrifying at the same time.
Indeed. But once you realize that it's a program and you extract yourself from it, then you're able to delete the program. But the ego is tenacious. So the only way to get out of it is to practice meditation. And you have to distinguish your buddhi from your manas. This is part of the yogic understanding. Manas, buddhi, ahankar. Ahankar, aham means I, right? But the ahamkar is the I thought. And the ego mind will continue to produce I thoughts. I want this, I hate that, I should do this, right? All of those I thoughts. And the manas then creates narratives about them. Oh, those people are like this. And it's full of projections and judgments and all kinds of negative attitudes toward the world. The buddhi is the capacity of the intellect to discern the illusion that the manas and the ahankara are creating. So if you awaken your buddhi, that which is becoming a Buddha, right? You awaken the buddhi at the soul level, you are then able to deconstruct the ego. But to awaken the buddhi, you have to silence the ego mind, because nearly, let's say 99% of your thoughts are ego thoughts. They're not the buddhi's thoughts, they're ego thoughts, and they are deceiving you. And so until you get to the point where you are master of your mind and you can keep the mind silent for a long period in meditation, then you create a space in which you download higher knowledge and power, willpower, that the ego doesn't have, because it is in internal conflict with itself. The ego wants so many different things that its willpower is paralyzed and deadlocked generally, because it doesn't know what it really wants, because it lacks essence. But once the buddhi is awakened and the heart is open, because this happens at chakra 4 and then chakra 5, which is the wisdom chakra. When these two are integrated, then you have the willpower, the wisdom, and the love of life, of God, of truth, of nature, of beauty, to be able to bring about a harmonious life for yourself and to create that for everyone in your sphere of influence.
Right.
Don't forget, if you are enjoying this episode right now, it would mean the world to us if you could support the Stars and Destruct team and podcast by clicking the subscribe, follow, and like button. Now back to the episode.
My question, though, right now, if we look at the modern day, everything that's going on in the world, and there's so much suffering for people, right? It's, it's one thing for us to speak about, okay, we must go into deep meditation to awaken, the buddhi and everything, but I'm just trying to think of, for example, to take it there. I have family in Ukraine right now, and we're dealing a lot with the war and, you know, having close friends being sent to the front lines and things like that. Actually, just recently, I had a close friend from my hometown. He was sent to the front lines, and his mom is close with my mom. And she called him in tears, just asking, please pray for my son. This is the second time they sent him to the front lines after he's already survived one bombing. And I look at her suffering, and I look at her despair, this mother, and I think about, how can I come to her and offer her some sort of support to help her through this life and through this suffering right now. Whereas, you know, for her to go into meditation right now, like she's coping with something so difficult. How do we help those people right now in that deep suffering to even find their way to the light?
Well, does she have a belief in God?
She does.
Okay, then I would suggest prayer. Okay?
Yeah.
And if one prays to God and asks God for help and for grace and for protection and for understanding and wisdom, it will come. Prayer will become meditation.
Right.
Right? So, but we have to turn to God. The ego must surrender to a higher power. Without that surrender, nothing can happen. But when it does happen, and it's sincere and heartfelt, which it would be in that situation, which is so tragic and horrifying, and both sides are responsible for this. It isn't just one, because this could have ended already, but it's part of the destruction at the end of Kali Yuga. This is not the last war; it's the first of many. It's going to spread. Right. Not that it's really the first. I mean, if you look at Libya and Syria and Yemen, and before that Vietnam, and there have been many that the U.S. was responsible for, and NATO and Western Europe and colonialism and all of that. And now we see that the balance of power has shifted toward Russia and China, and there's an ultimate conflict between these two power blocks that is going to reach a climax. Because no power bloc can submit to the other. The NATO powers are not going to submit to Russia or allow Russia to have an equal say and have multipolarity. It's not going to happen. So it's going to come to a head in nuclear war. It's unavoidable. We already know that. We have to face that fact. And the technology for that is in place, and it will happen very suddenly. And that will be the doomsday, the moment of apocalypse. And it's inevitable. That's how all the prophets have seen it, of every religion. They have predicted that we would get to this point. But it's a blessing, because what doom actually means is census. You know, in Russia, the parliament is called the Duma. It comes from the same word. And it means that all the souls will be counted by God. There is a final judgment. And those who have passed will go into very beautiful, luminous levels of consciousness. Others will have to go through purgatories or hell realms. But all of this is going to happen. And the simulation will dissolve in the divine light. God's presence will be totally here. So in a sense, it will all end with bliss very soon, not in a long period from now. And the suffering will be over. And when it's over, it will be recognized by every soul that this was always only a dream. And they have awakened from it, and they weren't really suffering. The ego was suffering, but the ego is unreal. It's a dream character. Just like you may have a dream in which you're being bombed or you're suffering and all of that, and you wake up and you say, oh, I'm so glad it was only a dream, right? So that's the way what will happen. People will wake up and they will be so in joy that it was only a dream, and that they still retain their soul, which is eternal, and that there will be a return. If they haven't graduated, they will have another opportunity in the next cycle. So no one is left behind, and no one suffers more than their karma had conscripted or mandated. The law of karma is accurate, even though it may take a long time for it to come. And so everyone only suffers to that extent. and then they are saved. There is salvation for everyone at the end. So if we have to trust God and recognize the goodness that is underlying all of this, even though it seems like evil is running the world, it's not actually, because it's leading to the ultimate blessing of all, which is the return of all souls to God.
Right.
And then to the creation of a kingdom of heaven after that.
Well, it's such a drive in the last 10 years of exponentially, it seems like a dog pile of sorts, like one thing after another. And like, even if you just look at since the Industrial Revolution, how much destruction has just exponentially carried this momentum forward.
Yes.
And to hear that you have a deep belief that nuclear war is inevitable, something I think that a lot of people might struggle with. Myself included, just being like, it's a lot to...
What are we preparing for now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to the sense with a deep belief in God. I think there's salvation in that and the understanding of everyone waking up from that dream. But what if someone was to say or propose, isn't there another way?
Well, let me say this, that if we didn't have this war, it would be even worse. The human species has become no longer the crown of creation and the top of the food chain. It's a slave species. We have literally become enslaved, and we have been microchipped, and we belong to a globalist cabal that has taken over the world and wants to run it. And God's not going to allow that to happen, because that would be a fate worse than death. Right. To have slavery of the species and total loss of the human spirit. And right now, if we look at everything, and we have to see this holistically, understand the whole, there's already a massive die-off of species of life. The biosphere is dead. The oceans are dead. The soils are dead. The bees are almost dead. And the butterflies and all the creatures that are responsible for sustaining life in the biosphere. There is a food shortage. There will soon be famine. There will be all kinds of suffering that are created both by geophysical instability, climate change, and all of the other things that are going on, as well as all the man-made and the geoengineering aspects that are also going on secretly. But all of this is creating a situation in which life will not be worth living. And so God is bringing the suffering to an end in the most merciful way possible, because it will happen suddenly. Within a single hour, it will end. And for most people, instantly, and they will feel no pain. It will happen so fast. The incineration of massive nuclear explosions, if you know how they are now, with gigantic 100-megaton bombs, and they're very effective and very precise. And so this is all being worked out by beings who don't know they're working for God, but they actually are. And it's the only way to save us from enslavement to very demonic powers.
Right.
But those demonic powers have to be defeated by human souls before that happens. That's why we have to gain our liberation and the human sovereignty again as manifestations of God. And that's why there has to be choreographed, which God is responsible for and accomplishing, of a simultaneous rise in consciousness of all those who want to awaken and become liberated, and at the same time the freeing from suffering from all of those who are not able to, or they're young souls, they're not mature enough to have that desire yet, and they will be taken out of their bodies and out of their suffering quickly and without any traces of leftover pain or horror or sanskaras, of feeling negativity. All of that will be eliminated by God.
That's powerful.
It's astounding.
100 years ago or more, actually it was in probably the 1820s, when it was first recognized that human beings as a species, but in the West in particular, by Western philosophers, that humanity had become nihilistic. The term nihilism came into being. And people don't realize it, but Hegel was the first one to say God is dead. Because Christianity had died. People still believed, but there was no real essence to it any longer. And the same for all of the Abrahamic religions. They had fallen into a corrupt and ineffective means for reaching God. And so Hegel said God was dead. Nietzsche said God was dead shortly after that, right? But and it was accepted. But what does that really mean? It means that because the belief in God was lost, that God has become death, right? God can't die, but God is here now as death. And the mass death that is happening is the return to God. Death is not a tragedy. Death is not horrible. We are all dead between lives all the time, and it's blissful. Death is not something to fear.
The ego fears death, though, right?
Only the ego, but the ego, again, is in a way Satan. It's the demonic part of consciousness that rejects God and denies God and is nihilistic.
And has eliminated him from all aspects of our culture and society at this point.
Exactly. So the ego has to be eliminated, and we return to soul consciousness and then to divine consciousness of the ultimate level, and then a new world will come about quickly, instantly. You know, a simulation doesn't require a slow evolutionary process. The Big Bang is not really how it happened, and Darwinian evolution is not reality. Everything happens instantly, and it happens at the highest level first and goes down, not that we gradually go up. So everything will happen in a very beautiful way. And it will happen without any memory of the horror. So in the next age, there will be no nostalgia or sadness that, all those people had to die. No, there'll be no recognition, no memory. We already are in a state of amnesia for our past. We don't realize that we were once gods and have fallen, and we don't realize that we soon will be a species of godlike beings again.
Wow. So the people that are really behind this terrible situation right now, if we're looking again at the war going on between Russia and Ukraine, so you're saying the people behind it, like Putin and all people in power, they are of that demonic energy force, or are they just completely severed from their soul? They're just run by the ego? Well,
that's what the demonic is. So most of them are, most of the people, and it includes, the billionaires, many of them, and there's a conglomerate of beings who think they're running the world. They are not really, and their plans are not going according to the way they wish they would. They're in a state of anxiety as well. So it's not like they're so happy and everybody else is suffering. No, they will also lose in this. They will not win. And they've created underground cities. They think they'll survive the nuclear war, and the U.S. has gigantic underground cities and military bases, etc. But they will all crack. There'll be volcanoes and other action that will eliminate them. So the ones who think they're so smart and masters of the universe and able to create these genocides will not succeed. God will be victorious, and all of those who are working with God will realize that victory, and all souls will have to go through a judgment. So if we can purify ourselves now and be free of needing to be judged and become angels now by awakening our subtle bodies, our light bodies, and then functioning here as angels on the planet, then we will really be able to serve in the upliftment of all of those who want to realize their divine nature. And that will fulfill our own karmic debt that we have fallen into in our own past lives by becoming egocentric ourselves and overcome whatever negative karma we did in this or other lives and bring us back into union with God.
So after this massive destruction, that you believe that there's going to be a nuclear destruction, is that kind of how the golden age is going to be birthed?
And where will that be?
And where would that be? And how does that look like?
Okay. First of all, it's not only a nuclear destruction. If you see the increase of super volcanoes that are going off,
Right.
earthquakes, massive ones, are increasing exponentially as well. Tsunamis, every possible kind of thing is happening. Even asteroids hitting their stride. It's all going to happen. The signs and wonders are going to be beyond a belief. And we also see glitches in the matrix, and people are becoming aware that things are very strange and they're not natural, and there are unexplainable events that are going on. So things are happening that are making people much more aware that there are forces that are invisible that are acting on the world as well.
What kind of glitches?
Oh, there are all kinds of things. You've heard of the Mandela effect.
The
Yeah.
Mandela
right?
effect
Yeah.
is fascinating.
And you also see airplanes stopped in the air.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes,
you
we've
see
seen
all
We've-
kinds of
yeah.
strange things happening.
Yeah.
We could go on and on. There's hundreds of very strange phenomena. I mean, there's plenty of websites devoted to those.
Right.
And some of them are not real. Some of them are
Right.
fakes and hoaxes, but some of them are real. And these things are really happening. So the world is becoming stranger and stranger, and people are awakening to the fact that it's not real. But there is a reality beyond that's responsible for it, and we have to connect with the ultimate reality, and then we will gain the power to transcend this illusion.
And this awakening that rises up amidst all of everything going on, is the awakening a purpose in order to then, once reborn, be reborn, as you're saying, to like a level of, God consciousness? Or is the awakening a possibility to actually change the direction that all of this is moving and save it? Because at the beginning you mentioned like we're getting down to the last minute. Now, is that the last minute for us to save ourselves, or is that the last minute to save others or to save the storyline?
Well, once you've saved yourself, in other words, your consciousness is now in resonance with God's mind, you will recognize that everything is happening as perfect, and there's no need to change anything, because God's mind is perfect.
Right.
So there's nothing you need to do except then complete the will of God by serving as one who uplifts others. And the ones who are meant to be uplifted will be uplifted, and those who aren't, or it wasn't their time yet.
Yeah.
You see, there are old souls, and there are souls who are of a middle age, and there are young souls. There are some souls who have only had one birth in this world and the whole cycle. They didn't participate in the golden age or the silver or the copper. They come at the end of the iron age, and this is their golden age, at least this time around. The ones who are billionaires and the Trumps and the Reagans and the Bidens, they for 15 minutes they run the world, although they're demented and hopeless and impossible. But they feel like they everything belongs to them, and it's a sham, and it's very short. But they get that. So everyone has a golden age, but then they fall very quickly into their own. In one lifetime, they go through a whole cycle in microcosm. And so it's those souls who will then learn from their mistakes and become slightly older souls next time, and then older and older. But there are some very old souls who come from the last Sat Yuga. Those are the ones who will awaken to the highest level and be the forces, the archangels, if you will, who will bring about the transformation. And I want to get back to what you asked before that I didn't quite answer, which is, what science has recently discovered is that there is not only matter, but there is antimatter. And there is an entire antimatter universe. That antimatter universe is both different and not different from this universe, because antimatter is this matter, but going in the other direction in time. And so it's the same, and yet it's different. But there are two timelines, and in the other timeline and this timeline are about to meet. And when they meet, it will be the meeting of matter and antimatter universes. And when matter and antimatter meet, they annihilate each other instantaneously. And when they annihilate each other, they annihilate space, they annihilate time. They annihilate the entire universe as if it never was, and there is only God. That's how this will end. And then the mind of God will spring a new simulation into being at the highest level.
And will that be the golden age?
Yes. So no violence is involved because it's instantaneous, no suffering.
Wow.
This entire cosmos is an artificial construct.
It's amazing.
That's so powerful.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And as far as the human experience through this, in our bodies, struggling with our egos, and our entire sort of journey as souls, rebirth again and again, are we the only ones here in this entire cosmos? Or do you think there's other humans in other places or other beings?
There are beings in other planets, and many of them are here.
Right.
Some of them are here participating in trying to take over this real estate because it's very nice, and they are supporting the cabal. And there are others who are much higher in their spiritual development, who are here because this is where the presence of God will be most intense in the cosmos to bring about that ultimate salvation, let's say, and they want to be part of that. So they are being drawn here to this out-of-the-way planet because it does have that vibrational frequency and the free will of God consciousness that isn't present in many other types of life forms.
Wow.
And so through this understanding, like looking at things that have been happening over the last 10 or even, couple of years, even since the pandemic has happened.
Plandemic, I would call it.
Plandemic.
If the cabal is able to succeed, there will be other viruses, other injections that will be even worse, that will create the total enslavement of the brain, which is part of what they want, as well as killing off most. But the rest of humans will literally be totally enslaved.
Well, and there's no worse fate. When you said that earlier, that resonated so truthfully inside me. Like it's almost like we imagined it so it's possible. Like I think of The Matrix, like the movie The Matrix, and you think about what that existence is, and how many steps away are we from that? If we can imagine it, we're already letting them put chips in our bodies. We're already letting them, control us to levels that we a year ago would have said we would be uncontrollable that way.
But then you mentioned something that there was no virus. But if people are listening to this right now, they're going to say, well, we've had COVID twice. You know what I mean? There was a
People have
virus.
a flu. The flu season has always been there. If you look at it, they say there's no flu anymore. There's only COVID, right?
Right. No, it's true.
So if they're
microchipping people, why? For what reason?
Well, then you're under constant surveillance. And so whenever they want to locate you in order to eliminate you, arrest you, or whatever, they can stop you. They can control where you go, how far you're able to travel, anything they want.
Well, they've already done that to us. We're Canadians.
Oh, yes, right.
We were Canadian refugees in Costa Rica.
You can literally see clips of our fearless leader, or fearful leader, we should say, saying the things that he would never do 24 months ago are all of the exact things that he did and implemented. And the things that, would have polled back then as basically the general consensus would imagine it to be unfathomable and unconstitutional. They're excitedly embracing and saying is the necessary for the common good.
Right.
And I find that really interesting. Like there's an absence of critical thought in 2022. And to me, that's like one of the most astounding features of this entire production. Because it feels like it's like a stage play. And as we watch it all play in the different places you can perceive it, the fact that it takes great courage to critical think. And so therefore, in a time of fear, critical thought then dies at the hands of exactly that.
Yes.
So how do we encourage critical thought? And because as much as I think encouraging walking a spiritual path is necessary, I think critical thought is hand in hand in that. Because in order to recognize we need to meditate more. And in order to recognize we need to work on our own soul and destroying and killing our own ego, that takes great critical thought. But when it comes to the pandemic, it's just sort of taken that necessary skill away from so many human beings and just stripped it from them.
Right. Well, many people never had it in the first place because the educational system in the West is so bad. Most people never get a course in critical thinking and are never encouraged to think critically.
Right.
They're encouraged to obey. And so it's often not there. In other cases, it's there, but there's a desire not to know because there's too much fear. And in other cases, there's actually coercion. If you start to think and speak out publicly, you'll lose your job, you will be attacked, you may have your bank account frozen, right? You may lose everything. So it's more about protecting one's illusion of security, not the lack of critical thinking.
Right.
But most people have been either bought off or scared off.
Yeah.
And there's quiet corners of people who do critically think but are so scared to even speak in their own social circles.
Correct.
And I think to us, again, it goes back to sort of the premise of why conversations like this, whether it's accurate or not, just the access to give people courage to talk. That people like us are worried about the fact that we can't even have a discussion. You're censored like that. It's just like they take
The
away your right to
censorship.
speak.
We spoke out once, very, very little bit about the Freedom Convoy. I don't know if you've heard in
Well,
Canada.
I wouldn't say it was
Yeah.
a little bit. We posted
We
about it.
posted, on social media ourselves standing with 2 signs that says mandate freedom. That's all we said. And we tried to really drive the narrative of being in the middle. We didn't want to be, we pick this side or this side. We talked about bringing yoga into this perspective of oneness and unity, that we need to unite as people and see each other as souls, not this, anti-pro-vax. And the interesting thing about us coming from the direction of love and unity, to see the amount of backlash and negativity and threats that we received from people, like from our community even, that, some decided to leave our community, some decided to, insult us and our family and things like that. And just to see like the intensity, like I feel like everybody's so charged right now with this negativity. How do we bring everybody down? How do we connect people again?
Well, again, the more you have courage, the more you can inspire others to have courage. But the problem is, in the ego itself, there is embedded within it a fear of death. And there's such a reason to have that fear now. It has been triggered. And those who see the truth are in a state of anxiety, because they know what's happening, and they are in addition to the fear, there's the shame and the guilt for not having the courage to do it.
Right.
But in order to break through this, you have to be willing to face death. You have to say, truth is more important, and following the will of God, and being a being who is pure and who lives in love and who wants life to thrive. It's not that I want the world to end, by the way.
Yes.
And that's why a new world, it's important to know that a new world is coming, but we have to gain the courage by transcending the ego and its fear of death, and to know that there is no death. It's only when you are in deathless consciousness that you will have the courage to truly speak the truth in full. And that's what more and more of us have to have. And we have to go through that rite of passage in order to have that. And that's what yoga is about.
Right.
To us, that's what yoga is about.
Yeah.
It truly is.
But you see in the yoga community, there's a lot of people that are intimidated by it, and they just, they step back.
Sure.
They recluse, and they, obey.
Sure, because yoga for them is an exercise to look good and feel good, but it's not about transcendence of the ego. But
Right.
that's what yoga originally means
That's right.
and is and has always remained. And that's what we have to emphasize again. That's why here we call ourselves jnana yogis, the yoga of knowledge, of the truth.
Right.
And the hatha yoga is a sideline. We do it, but we don't emphasize that. It's the meditation and the wisdom that comes from meditation, and the ability to live in truth and to overcome the ego's desire for impure enjoyments and addictions that take away its power to live at a higher frequency. And you have to have the discipline to go through that self-transformation to achieve that courage and that freedom. But freedom is what life is about. If you're not free, life isn't worth living. And you have to have that freedom internally. Then you'll have it externally. People think we'll get it externally and then we'll have it. No, it has to start from within. And everyone has to take responsibility for going first, not waiting for others to do it. And then things will happen.
I think freedom is the great motivator for so much of what Juliana was explaining was that post, is the idea that a government can take freedom away with the snap of a finger, under the guise of something that seems so false.
False.
And at that point in history, so false. Like, it wasn't like it was at the beginning when it was a big mystery. Are we all going to turn into zombies? Are we all going to,
Well, that's what they told you.
Because at the very beginning of it, no one knew. But it's funny that, like, this was, 11th hour into the nonsense. And all of a sudden, playing street hockey and it was a bunch of people playing street hockey with bouncy castles, like giving away free food, doing all this, and now like Tamara Lich is in prison. Like, so we're talking about talk about looking into a mirror. It's like we persecute Russia and so many tyrannical states for putting their political opponents in prison, and the main political opponent that speaks of freedom in Canada is now behind bars.
That's right.
It's fascinating. But everyone on this side of the fence doesn't have the courage to look at that, make that comparison, and explore what might be a different perspective than the one being fed to them actually is. Right or wrong, I'm not sure I have the capacity to explore that, but I think it's important to explore all sides of the prism.
That's right.
And to look inside to figure out the truth and the depth in there. Because I find truth really interesting. We're talking about truth a lot, but are we as humans capable of understanding an ultimate truth?
Oh, yes, but at the soul level, not at the ego level.
Right.
And the ego level doesn't want to know, because the more you know at the ego level, the more shame you feel for your own self-betrayal.
Right.
So you have to transcend the ego in order to want to know then the full truth of God consciousness.
Do you think,
But let me just add, in addition to what you said, there are many political prisoners in the West. Julian Assange is a prisoner for a long time. And why? Because he revealed crimes that a government was committing, right? And now there is disinformation and there is censorship on the internet, so you're not allowed to speak the truth. It's completely marginalized and ridiculed.
Right. Snowden. Look at honestly, like Assange's story, Snowden's stories, they're making movies about it, yet no one's doing anything to say, oh, well, that, like, there's this very strange, almost like psychosis in our culture.
it's a mass psychosis.
Well, where we can look at terrible things 5 years ago and think, well, those terrible things aren't happening now. Let's make a movie about that, and let's glorify it and talk about it. And then let's not actually assess what's happening in the current state, where I think to some degree it's probably worse now than it was 5 years ago.
Oh, much worse.
Yeah, like you're saying, this denial, this egoic denial to say, to explore that rather than like fantasize about what happened before. We know the CIA is a terrible institution and has done nothing but basically police secretly the entire globe, implementing, the arm of America. Yet no one's saying, well, what are they doing now? If that's what they were doing in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And we know every decade all of the atrocities. And it's really fascinating to me. And you're right, political prisoners in the West, this is not new.
In a way, we're all political prisoners now. And the world is a necropolis. There's an ongoing death event, a mass death, a mass die-off is happening every day. And people don't want to see it. But the statistics are there, even though they try to fudge them and make them as low as possible. But it's still quite visible. But nobody acts. You mentioned the word zombie before, but in fact, the majority are becoming zombies. And some of them because of chemical changes, genetic changes caused by injections, but others simply because their critical abilities to think and their ability to separate from the herd because of their terror of a truth that would make them enemies of the state keeps them in a zombie condition.
That's so fascinating. We used to watch, and we still do, we watch a YouTube channel called We Are Change. And sort of we try to find places, different types of places we can get information from. And as the pandemic was starting, Luke was right on the heels of it. And he was right about so much of it. And he's this independent journalist. He does it from wherever he is, hotel rooms, wherever, but he's really passionate at challenging the establishment, but also in trying to figure out where the truth lies inside. And there was a point in that where Julianne and I, ahead of everyone, like, and I'm not bragging. There's no sense of achievement being ahead. It was just, he gave us information. We were like, so, we recognized something was coming. But the biggest fear to that was, to us, we're like, what if it is what we're seeing in China, where it's like zombies?
Like people are falling on the streets.
And then, of course, there's this big breath of air that came out where we're like, oh, it's just the flu. But now you think about it, and you literally just tied it full circle to it was actually creating zombies.
Yes.
Because
but also distracted zombies too. Like, I feel like you hear it's some things that happen in the world, and then you would expect people to be like, what? Like, I think about, for example, Epstein, like that whole situation where, like, it's been revealed that there's been children abused on an island with many very, like, important high-level people, and they talk about it, and then everyone just forgets, and we move on with our day. It's like, have we just become that asleep as people,
as a collective
body, that we can't even like wake up to the idea, what was that,
Well, the majority are accustomed to being slaves, and the slaves have no right to question the masters, even though the masters are perverts and murderers and all of the kinds of things that we know. Nonetheless, they feel powerless. They have been indoctrinated into feeling powerless. And they do feel powerless. And they've been taught to go and buy things and eat things and do things to distract themselves, and to not care about the political things that only the upper class deals with. It's not for us plebeians to deal with what the political class is doing. That's their business. And so people feel like they are simply distant spectators of these events without any voice or any say. And for the most part, that's true. So there really isn't a possibility of political revolution any longer. And the police are part of that ruling cabal. They are not on the side of the people. And the armies also, even though the armies are being forcibly injected also. Yeah. And you have people quitting, but nonetheless, most are going along with it. And so you see, and that proves that they're not interested in winning these wars, because you wouldn't inject your own army with lethal injections that makes them incapable of flying planes and all of that if you really wanted victory. It's not about that. It's about mass destruction.
Right.
And so you have to understand that this has been decided already by those beings. But the lower classes, and everyone's now in the lower class, because the middle class has been destroyed, frankly. Right. And these are all banana republics, as they used to call them. And there's no political power by the majority any longer. All that we have left is spiritual power. Wow. That's our only last weapon, and it's the ultimate weapon, and it's stronger than nuclear weapons because it overcomes death.
Right.
Do you think that, I was listening to Marianne Williamson recently talk about the connection between the spiritual movement and the political movement. Because when she went into politics, a lot of people told her she was out of her lane. And she tied a lot of the movements of abolition and change and social change and justice to the spiritual movements. And it was really interesting how she did it. And I'm not going to butcher it by trying to give the examples, but there was a direct correlation between political change and spiritual awakening. Sure. Do you think that with enough of the good work done, that is possible in the stage we're in?
No, not anymore. Look at the elections are rigged.
Oh, hey, that's true. I think she went into a lane that, I don't believe voting has any power at this point at all anymore. Not even rigged. I think it's just a facade. Okay. It feels like a facade to me.
Sure.
But in so much that to build a new system outside of that system.
Only if there are enough spiritually liberated beings who are fearless and totally in alignment with the will of God. And yes, a new world will be created, but this one will have to go through destruction.
Right.
There's a death, and out of the death is rebirth. That's the way the world works.
I like that.
You can't avoid the death and then still have rebirth.
Right.
This world is already too broken, too polluted. The web of life has been destroyed. It has to go through its terminal phase. But death is not a bad thing. It's this horror of death that we have to get over. We're in a massive planetary death event. It is underway. The idea of trying to stop it and resist it and work our way around it, that's a waste of our efforts. We should be reaching God consciousness and accepting God's will, and then becoming co-creators of the new world that will come about as a result of our having transcended the illusions and gained consciousness of the whole. It is that absolute self that we are all manifestations of. There's only one self and one intelligence behind all of this. And we are all parts of that. And when we can contain the entire whole, then we have power to make a shift in the manifest, the explicate order, as the physicist David Bohm called it. But until we have arrived at the implicate order, we cannot achieve any transformation at this level.
I remember there's the idea of the night, was it the dark night of the soul, right? And that's an idea in our souls when we get to that point where we have to me, I always visualize like you have to walk through the fire and not burn at the stake. I feel, to me, that we are right now as a collective body collectively at that part. Do you think we can grow from it and find strength, or are we burning at the stake now? We can't even go through the fire anymore collectively.
Collectively, no. The fire will destroy bodies and egos. But souls will remain, and pure spirit remains, obviously. So that's what the purification is really about. If you realize who you are, you will be unaffected by the burning of whether it's nuclear or whether it's spiritual or whether it's any level of that, because it's all unreal, the manifest. What's real is God. And when you are in God consciousness, you will recognize that the creation of a new world without any trace of the current suffering, instantly, without any time being required for it, that is the best way to go. And that's what God's plan is.
Wow.
And once there is that destruction of matter and antimatter, then it's instantaneous. And we're outside of time. And that's when you know God fully. God is beyond time and space. God is eternity. And we are also eternal beings. And once we are back in our full eternal mode, that's when that power of creation then is reborn.
And you speak about finding God and connecting to that energy within us, the soul. And, people practice a whole lifetime to reach that nirvana state, that through meditation. But then you see there's other people, and we know a lot of communities, especially in Nosara, where we're living right now, where they use plant medicine to help them gain that connection with the spirit. What is your take on plant medicine and the use of it to get to that level of consciousness?
It's a complex question. Because first of all, in Peru, ayahuasca was used, and other parts of Colombia, other parts of South America, it was used by shamans who are extremely well trained in dealing with the mindset of the campesinos, of the tribal people in those areas, and they served the tribes. And for the most part, it was the shamans who took the plant medicine on behalf of the clients, not the clients who took it. The shamans took it, and they were then able to see whatever demonic powers or thought forms were oppressing the person and remove them, and then help bring divine energy in. But a shaman was someone who was well trained for decades and apprenticed to another shaman and learned how to make use of the plant medicines properly. You come into the West with an entirely different psychic structure of the Western ego, very different than the tribal ego in South America. And that same medicine can have very different effects. It will help some people get to a higher state for a few hours, and believe they went through ego death, but it was a delusion. They come back and their egos are still there. It can have some people have mixed experiences where they have some superconscious elements come into their trip and some subconscious fantasies and delusions come in, and they will have they'll be more confused when they come out of it than they will be helped. You have others who have a latent psychotic fragment in their subconscious, and they will literally go psychotic and they won't come back.
Wow.
And I know people, I've worked with many people who have taken the plant medicines. I've also done them. I'm experienced in this.
Yeah.
And I don't recommend it except in certain conditions where there is really an adept shaman who also is psychoanalytically trained, who understands who should take it and who shouldn't in the first place, and how to deal with bad experiences and how to deal with spirit possession that can sometimes happen, and other kinds of supernatural phenomena that most therapists don't know how to deal with and most shamans don't know how to deal with. And there can be a shattering of the psychic vessel of a person so that they can never come back together again, and they're destroyed for life. So, and even the people who are helped the most by ayahuasca, and I myself am in that category, you don't get liberation from it. You get a glimpse. The same with whether it's mushrooms or DMT in some other form, you get a glimpse of some higher dimensions, not the absolute reality. Right. You get an intermediate plane where there are spirits in the plural, and some good, some not so good. And at best you will experience angels, and you'll encounter information from the Akashic records and other things that will help you in your life, but you won't achieve liberation. Spiritual liberation has to be done without drugs. It has to be done in a meditative state where it is your own will to transcend that is responsible for it, not some supplement that was artificial or temporary. It has to be something that then you can sustain. You have to turn nirvikalpa samadhi into sahaja samadhi, which means a level of samadhi that you never leave, that stays there even when you're in an ordinary waking state. You're always connected. You never lose your God consciousness. And without having done that, liberation is only a dream. It's not real yet.
It's just a taste.
Yeah. A glimpse? Do you think they glimpse it? Well,
you can get a glimpse of higher states and of the potentiality of consciousness for its infinity and beauty, but you won't get liberated from the matrix. That won't happen. Right. That has to be done through your own sadhana.
Yeah. To us, we've never done it. We've been around it for, it feels like a decade. So many people in our direct circles, you know, we went to Peru and we saw it being like commercialized.
That's unfortunately what's happening.
And sold to Westerners, and it made us sick while we were, it was just like, to see it in like sign windows and things like this. Like it was
causing
just
a lot of damage.
Oh my goodness.
To a lot of people.
And we've seen a lot of people at arm's length, like come out not better. We've seen, there is always a story, you know, and I won't just focus on the negative, but there's a lot of people who claim that trauma was healed through it. There's a lot of, you know, addiction that is said to be reversed. So there, you know, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a shaman.
There are some cases of that. I don't deny that either.
But it's just, it's so frightening to us to see, well, to see the damage. Like we've had one person in specifically go into a psychotic episode and point to us as his energy center to enact these terrible, like demonic and he never came back. It never came back.
I understand.
So it's something we're very always curious to. And Juliana, at one of her teacher trainings, what was it that your teacher was saying about it being the fast track? Like,
well, it was very similar to what you're saying. I had a meditation teacher in India tell me the same thing, because somebody asked him, like, what is your thought on psychedelics and plant medicine? And he's saying that not only is that a fast track, but also it's very addictive, because people feel like, oh my gosh, I had a glimpse. I want to go back. I want to go back. I want to go back. And they keep, you know, taking it. And that, again, you're dealing with chemicals in the brain. Like that can't be safe.
No, It's not. And
Yeah.
often you need higher doses, and your trips tend to get worse and worse. Your first ones may be beautiful, and then you start to get the demonic side of that vibrational frequency. And it's not a fast track to liberation.
Right.
It's only a track to an intermediate level of consciousness. That's a dead end. So I don't recommend it.
Have you signed up to be a Star Walker yet? If you haven't, there's a link down in the description of this video or in the show notes, and it's where you sign up for the Star Walker newsletter. There, you'll get behind the scenes content, you'll get notifications of new episodes, and all kinds of extra little goodies that we're planning on sending throughout the rest of this year. We have tons of new episodes coming up, so join us there. Be a Star Walker. Back to the episode.
The interesting thing, because you just mentioned trauma, and something I wanted to bring forward, because I do feel like a lot of people that have suffered through trauma and they haven't found a way to heal themselves, maybe they haven't had the right teachers or guides, they go to plant medicine, they go to ayahuasca because they think that's their answer to heal trauma. But now we were discussing here that it's not always the answer, may not be the safest way. What else would you recommend for somebody that is in that very difficult place in their life right now that is looking for healing?
They need to be in an energy field that can contain them and accept the trauma. They need to experience truth. They need to experience divine love. And they need to experience an extraction from the ego into the soul, because the soul is not traumatized. It's only in the ego.
Right.
And so if one achieves soul consciousness, one can be relieved of the trauma. And if one deletes the ego program, the trauma is gone. But it has to be done in soul consciousness. And that can't be done on plant medicine. You're not able to do the processing in that.
Right.
And afterwards, you're too confused, or you're in a depleted state because of what the energy effect on the brain has been of it. So it's not the best way of doing it. Under certain controlled therapeutic conditions, it can be effective, I think, if you have somebody trained who knows how to use those medicines properly. But it can be done most safely, and we're designed to do it through meditation and through an intersubjective processing in which we feel safe again to love. Because it's usually that the heart is closed and we are covered with defense mechanisms that have created aggression and paranoia and those things. And when we can release ourselves of those, the trauma is gone.
Right. How do you open the heart, though? How do you open yourself to love?
Well, that's why you have to be in a safe situation with someone who is liberated, or someone who is at least in soul consciousness, who can offer that divine love that's unconditional, without judgment, without projection, and enable you to gradually or quickly let go of the defense mechanisms and the negative beliefs about yourself and about the world, and then start fresh and be in that core of divine light that is never touched by trauma.
And so to anyone listening that is experiencing trauma, or is at least self-aware that it's affecting their ability to function, how can they, like, what are the steps towards, like, what is a practical way of finding someone like that you describe?
Well, an ashram like this, that's one of the reasons we created this ashram, to be able to offer retreats for people and longer term stays to help them to heal. There are other places where that can happen, other spiritual communities, and there are some therapists who are well trained and who do know how to use different medicines when they are, let's say, required to heal the trauma because of its severity, and also safe to use. And this includes other types of substances as well, like MDMA and LSD even, and mushrooms and various other types of shamanic medicines. But for the most part, it's the energy field that's created when one is not in an altered state that is necessary to heal the trauma in a permanent way. So one feels safe that this is reality. It's the bedrock. It's not just a momentary glimpse of a sense of safety. And then when one is in a situation and a community in which people are loving and cheerful and friendly and following the Dharma then one begins to feel at home in the world again, and one lets go of those traumas. But let me add that today nearly everyone is traumatized.
Right.
Nearly everyone has a childhood that was not sufficiently loving or attentive because of the situation. People have to work, and couples break up, and all kinds of things happen so that the child does not get raised properly to have a healthily structured ego that can be transcended. And they don't have a rite of passage. And they are not encouraged to go on a vision quest, but to stay small, or to become an accountant, or do something for financial security, not for spiritual growth. So people don't get rid of their traumas, and they become embedded and become part of their identity. But nearly everyone is a walking wounded today.
Wow.
And what role does trauma play into the calcification of this ego state, like this postmodern ego we're talking about?
Yeah, it distorts the ego. It makes it more defensive, more paranoid, more aggressive,
Right.
and creates much worse conditions in which spirituality can't blossom.
Right. And this is very important to Julianne and I. We have a 1.5-year-old son, Xavier, and we're, we don't know a lot about parenting, but we have a lot of intuitions and very passionate ideas about how to plant seeds in him that would be the most beneficial for him in the future. Is there advice based on your assessment of trauma and being involved so pertinently in so many of society in this day and age, and to us and to other parents like us? Is there some advice or some just straight, like, give us the goods?
Well, it's very complicated, because at each age level, different conditions are required. Right now, at his age, he requires what you're giving him, which is love and containment and attention and constant sense of being protected and safe and unconditionally loved and adored. That's what is needed. There will come a time in the terrible 2s and 3s that the child will need to be able to be rebellious and need to break away, and need to be also to learn discipline and the law, and there will be a change of relationship, and you'll have to be able to adapt to what those needs are of a growing boy who's going to become a man, and who will need to have that power of individuation. And so as the child grows, they will require more space and more freedom and more ability to make their own decisions. But it all has to be done in an age-appropriate way. So it's a great art, and I couldn't give you in a short moment all that you need to know, because there's so much to know about child psychology that I have learned along the way, and the different levels of the development of our cognition, our critical thinking, and all of that. That if you insist upon it too soon, it will have a negative effect of resistance. But if you wait too long, then the curiosity won't develop. So you have to be very attentive to what the child is ready for, and to encourage their curiosity to grow and to develop and to break the boundaries and to keep becoming different from what they were, and encourage their independence when they get to a certain age. So you don't hold on to them, right? And so there's a great need for dispassion as well as compassion and love, and to know that he is God's child. He's not your child.
That's
right?
beautiful.
You're just temporary chaperones, but the child belongs to the Lord.
Right. Wow. But how do you raise a child in a time that we're in right now, where, when he becomes of age, he'll be able to look at the internet and to look at all of these dark forces that are around us?
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And I think for most people, bringing a child into the world today is not a blessing. So because of the kinds of things that are happening, and the forced injection of babies, and babies being born to mothers who were, and the effects of that, and the effects of a society coming apart, and financial bankruptcy and food shortages. So we understand you would have to be in very special conditions like you are in, even to have a sense that this is something that you can deal with in a beautiful, godly way. fortunately you can, but you're going to have to be very protective because of the nature of the negative vibrations in the world, and the type of lawlessness that is
Yes.
current. So this is a longer conversation to talk about, and I think that you will have to really have a kind of detachment as well as love, and accept that everything is in the hands of God, and it's not on your shoulders, so that you don't take it on as a burden, and you're able to be in a carefree state and communicate that. So you don't create a sense of fear in the child because of your fear for the child, right? But you have to be prudent, and you have to be careful.
Wow.
But you're walking a
fine line.
That's thin line.
That's really interesting. I think we've seen it as a balance so far, and doing our best to bring him out of all that which, in Western society can place such a heavy burden on his development, even just the screen culture, the distraction culture, the fear culture, like everything. So we had Xavier here in Costa Rica for the reasons of just like
the conscious birthing,
aspect of
wonderful.
it. And I think the idea of nature, I think it's been sort of a constant in a lot of our podcasts so far. Nature seems to be a very common thread for the driver of people back to their source.
Yes.
And so
back to their souls, maybe too. Now that we're learning,
right? And I think so. To us,
that's why we've created this community, because the culture out there, I don't think is conducive to children. So we've created a spiritual community that we want eventually to, even now, to start inviting people with families, with children to join us, or to we're glad to help other communities to learn from what we have learned the hard way. If you wanted to start one somewhere else, that we would support you. We would like to create a network of spiritual communities where it's safe to raise children spiritually.
That's amazing.
That's a
little
dream
Garden
of ours.
Garden of Eden, I guess, right? Like this, creating the space that you guys are creating here in the ashram. It truly feels like it. Even today when we had the tour, many times I felt like I told Mark, I'm like, I feel like I'm in a dream. Like there was just like this energy. I felt like I was dreaming this, that I'm not actually here. I was like, I'm in heaven somewhere.
It's true. I know.
It's a very interesting feeling. And it's, it says a lot about the energy that's being created here by the community that you guys have created. And, just based on our conversation today, feeling like, oh my gosh, there's something, like you're saying, there's going to be a big distraction here. So creating communities like this is going to be our way of
and some will survive
it.
the destruction and be the ones who are the pioneers who bring about the new world. So it is important to have communities, especially in a place like Costa Rica, which is not going to be in the war zone directly. There's no military and no oil here. There's no reason to bomb or invade or anything. So there are a few places in the world that will survive that shockwave. But it is important now to be able to create those conditions quickly before things get so bad that people can't even travel here or be able to have food. That's why we're growing our own food, you see.
Amazing.
I think that will be necessary very shortly.
Wow. So you really think this is going to happen very soon?
You can see it exponentially increasing. You can see the escalation of the Ukraine war that's threatening already to spill over into Lithuania, Poland, Transnistria, right, all over. And you see it with China, with Taiwan, right? And you see a threat of a war with Iran, right? All of these, they're all going to go off simultaneously at a certain point, and it will become global, and it will escalate to the ultimate level because they have to. They have nothing short of that, and that's the goal. You see, because they weren't able to succeed in injecting enough people. So then they went to the food shortage thing, but they weren't able to create the famine enough. So the only way now that cabal will survive is through the nukes, and that's why that's their final plan, their fallback plan, and they have the underground cities ready, and it seems like they have decided on that, and that's what's being escalated now, and it's happening rapidly.
And the fact that most people can't or won't allow themselves to comprehend this kind of discussion. Like there'll be emotional reactions. There'll be, of course, like triggers, all kinds of stuff. That's like the zombification of people. Is there, like, can you really not help those who do not want to be helped?
You can help vibrationally. And there is what Sheldrake discovered, a morphogenetic field. We are all connected in one single noetic field, even though we don't consciously get the messages. But we will get them in dreams, and we will get them in karmic events and synchronicities and that kind of thing. So yes, anytime you reach that coherent soul level, your vibrations are disseminated throughout the planetary noetic field, and everyone is touched by it, even if they're not consciously. And when enough of us get there to that vibrational level, then the message is coherent and is powerful, and people will receive the light. Every soul will receive it.
That's beautiful.
What is the light?
Oh, that's God's light, divine light.
Yeah.
Everything is light. This whole world is made of light. What you think of as matter is just frozen light. It's all light. The quantum wave function that gets collapsed into making the world look like it's got material objects it's just light. Probability waves that are made of divine light. That's all the universe is.
Is that love too as well?
The light is love. It's
Light is
God's love in action. It's the emanation of God's love light that creates a world. And that the world will turn back to light. That's what everything will turn into, because it is that. And then the light will reform as a beautiful world. Very simply, very quickly.
Right. So how do people embody that light right now?
We are that light already. We just have to know it and accept it.
So self-realization.
We have to get rid of the ego that creates the collapse of our quantum wave function. When that is gone, then our light body becomes more visible and more clear to us. And then gradually we get the power to eliminate even the physical body. You know, in Tibet, the great lamas go through a process called the rainbow body, where when they're about to die, to leave the body, they cause the body to simply disappear. All that is there is fingernails and rainbows that appear all around the hut where the person was meditating.
Wow.
And it's a very famous phenomenon, and it's like a message that, yes, goodbye, and there's no body left to bury or anything. And this has also happened to Christian saints over the years, and it happens among sages in many traditions. So this is what's going to happen to all of us. The whole world will become just a rainbow of divine light, and then a new world will form.
Wow.
And that's where hope lies, maybe.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's important, because I think when you can focus so easily on the negative, like, and the darkness, and people really like this duality, like the good and the bad. But I think rising above that, it's something I've heard you speak of in your teachings, to come above duality, to find the singular.
Yes.
Can you speak to the duality a little bit to help people understand the labels we put on things and how...
Okay. Everything is also its opposite. You know, and they talk about the unification of the pairs of opposites. Ultimately, there is no evil, and the good and the evil are ultimately one. The noumenal and the phenomenal are one. The Buddhists say samsara and nirvana are one, right? Non-duality is the truth. But the world is the externalization, the projection of God's energy, which is non-dual. It's a single intelligence, a single ineffable reality of pure mind that gets projected because of the emanation of divine light, like a pulse that goes out and forms the universe. And then the pulse returns back into the light, into the source. And that's what's happening now. Our pulse is now returning, the pulse of God. It's like systole, diastole, heartbeat. But when God's energy, when God calls it back, then the world disappears and only the light remains. and then a new pulse which creates a new world. And we've gone through this many, many times, infinite number of times. All of the Hindu teachings are about that. Brahma opens his eyes and there's a world, closes his eyes and the world disappears, right? It's in the mythology. And so this is well known, and those who turn to the ancient texts will recognize the truth of it. Even the Christian texts, like the Book of Revelations, it's all about this time period. And we see equivalents in all of the religious traditions. So it's known, but because people have become atheistic and cynical and non-believers, they don't want to accept this. Because they become identified with body instead of soul and spirit, they're in a denial of death. But death and life are non-dual. We are dead right now because God is death. God is the absence of the material. God is transcendent. That's what death is eternal life. But we don't know that from the ego level. And so we are, because we are souls and we are pure spirit, we are dead as well as alive. And if we can get into the non-duality of that and be dead while alive, which is what Jivan Mukti is, that is the fearless state of being an avatar. And so that's what is our destiny, if we choose it.
Wow.
And when you use the word avatar, can you explain that a little bit?
It means that the divine energy, the divine intelligence, the divine light has descended into your body and is now being transmitted into the matrix, into this phenomenal realm.
Right.
Wow, that's powerful. That's amazing. Wow.
So you're both on the path to this liberated state of becoming avatars.
Yeah.
Which is why it's a great joy to be with you both.
Oh.
Thank you. I mean, I think one of the last things I would love, again, to just bring to the people that are listening to this, in all of this conversation, it's all about how can we be love? How can we be connected to that God's consciousness? So maybe you could just share one last words of wisdom. How can people right now in their everyday situations, going through this and that and facing destruction and famine and all of the things that are facing us, how can they become love and light?
Well, our true nature is love and light. So all we have to do is remember, I'm not the body, and I'm not the thoughts that occur in the body consciousness. And withdraw inward, go into your heart, go into your core, and you'll feel the presence of that divine light and love. It's there, it never leaves. You leave it by externalizing your consciousness into identification with body. But realize you're not the body, and you are eternal. You were never born, and you will not die. If you will really sit with that thought deeply and meditate on it, there will be an awakening. There will be a perceiving of that light. And then the heart will open and you'll feel the bliss of divine love, and it will emanate out. And once you feel the joy of the truth of who you really are and what you are, you won't want to come back into the illusion again. And then you'll be able to live, even with all of the horrors that are happening and the difficulties of life, realizing it's God's dream and it's all perfect and nothing will affect you. And you'll be able to bring peace into the hearts of others who are anxious and suffering. And that's really our dharma. That's our mission. That's our duty.
That's beautiful. Because once you realize it's an illusion, then there's nothing to fear. Nothing to fear.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And that's, I think, the pearl of wisdom that can help liberate so many people from this trance. I think that's so special because it's just so crippling, Yes. Like people I'm so close to are just so so I guess crippled by it all, but just completely taken over. And I think that's why, we're constantly leaning into this idea of what can people do. And I think
because people are searching for it, but
the awakening is people
they have
want
to
it.
awaken and transcend the ego.
Yeah,
right.
Within the ego, you cannot change your consciousness. You cannot will it. But if you transcend the ego into your soul, it's there spontaneously. You don't have to do any effort because that is who we are.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
Reminding ourselves of our God consciousness,
Yes.
like you mentioned, that's
Yes.
always there within us.
Yes.
And we've just fallen asleep to it.
Yes.
And we have to wake up.
That's it. It's
Well,
all
thank
about
you.
Thank you.
Awakening, illumination, and liberation.
Yes.
That's the path.
love
And that's
that.
our destiny.
And I like that you focus on making the choice. We talk like the mantra for Boho Beautiful has always been like, your decisions today will define your tomorrow. And to me, when I hear about creation and fall and redemption, and that moment, as Juliana's speaking of like the dark night of the soul, there's that moment of choice
Yes.
to choose which way you want to go.
Yes.
And I think like
We all have a choice.
that we all have a
Yeah.
choice.
Yes.
And because it's an illusion, there's nothing to fear. So making the choice that you know that's right in your heart frees you of the guilt of knowing you're not, and frees you to be able to become in the potentiality that I think we all have it.
Oh, yes.
Because we're all the same thing.
Yes.
Like, that's so beautiful to me.
And because of our political and social freedoms are being taken away, the only freedom we have left, really, is the freedom of will to choose God and to choose our highest consciousness. And that will save us. It's enough.
Wow.
And they can't take that away from us.
That's amazing.
Wow. Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you
Shunyamurti.
both.
Oh, my
This has
goodness.
been just
Namaste.
an honor, a pleasure, so enlightening, and wow. Thank
It's
you.
mutual. You're always welcome back.
Oh,
And
my
if
goodness.
there's any way I or the community can serve you on your
Wow.
path, we'll be happy
Well,
to
thank
help.
you.
And likewise,
Yeah.
like an open door for anything we can do as
Wonderful.
well.
For us, just knowing that you guys are here so close to where we are in Costa Rica is a blessing, because it's just like we said, the energy that is coming from this beautiful place, the sanctuary, is calls us home. We're like, wow, it's so beautiful.
You're always
here.
welcome to
Thank
stop
you.
by, and I hope we stay connected
Yes,
and you
likewise.
connect with the whole
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Yes,
hope
thank
this is
you.
the first of many.
Yeah.
I really,
Wonderful,
really
I
do.
agree.
Yes, thank you so
Amazing.
much.
We hope you guys enjoyed this incredible episode today. Don't forget to click that follow button, subscribe button.
And check out the Sat Yoga Institute on YouTube if anything or everything that Shunyamurti said speaks to your heart.
Yes, we'll also include all the links in the bottom of the description and show notes to this episode for you to learn all about Sat Yoga and the Sat Yoga Institute as well.
Follow and subscribe, and there's more episodes coming every single week.
All our love. Thank you.